Howdy readers and howdy film buffs. I'm Jason, this is Chapter and Verse, and this is my October video for my Eukarya Coffin Today project, Mortality in Literature and Film. I realize that we're a couple of days into November now, so I apologize for the video being slightly tardy, but for the month of October we didn't read any book for the project, but we did watch Jacob's Ladder. This was directed by Adrian Lyne, who is most famous for having directed Fatal Attraction, and it was written by Bruce Joel Rubin, who also wrote the screenplay for Ghost, which is a far inferior film in my opinion. Ghost came out the same year as Jacob's Ladder, 1990, and Ghost actually won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, although I would argue that it should have gone to Jacob's Ladder. The other interesting thing about Jacob's Ladder is that this doesn't appear in the credits anywhere that I could see, but it might be said that Jacob's Ladder was not based on, but inspired by a short story by Ambrose Bierce called An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. And Ambrose Bierce was a writer that we read a lot about earlier this year in the project in Drew Gilpin Faust's book, This Republic of Suffering. So he was a veteran of the Civil War, and he went on to have a prolific career as a writer after the Civil War. And that short story of his, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, seems to have been the jumping off point for Bruce Joel Rubin. So, Jacob's Ladder. What's it about? So Tim Robbins stars in it as an American soldier in Vietnam. Now, before I go any further, let me just say this video is going to have spoilers in it. There's no way really to discuss this film without spoilers. So yes, Jacob is an American soldier in Vietnam, and we see him as well in his civilian life after he's been discharged. He's back in the States in New York, and working as a postman, or so we're initially led to believe. The reality is that all of the scenes in which we see Jacob in his civilian life are actually a scramble or a reinterpreting by his consciousness in the moments before he dies in Vietnam. So the film opens with essentially an attack on his unit in Vietnam, and there are these flashbacks to it throughout the film, and we're never quite sure what happened. But he dies from his wounds in that attack. We don't know this until the very end of the movie, but he dies from his wounds, and all of this stuff that we see of his life back in New York City, working his job with the post office, visits to his chiropractor, his unsettled relationship with a co-worker of his at the post office named Jezebel, or Jezzy, his memories, his conversations with Jezzy about, and with his chiropractor about his previous marriage, right, and the child that he lost. He and his ex-wife had a child who died before he went to Vietnam. But again, all of those scenes haven't actually happened for Jacob. This is the work of his mind, kind of, I don't know, Tetrising together his memories, his wishes, his regrets. And so those scenes of his civilian life, while most of them feel very quotidian, they also feel very nightmarish at times. You know, there's a scene where after having been abducted by these kind of shadowy figures, and getting in a fight with him in the car, and then being essentially kind of thrust from the car, he's in a hospital with his back injured, and when they're taking him through these corridors of the hospital, I mean, there are these corridors that are strewn with limbs, and there's blood all over the floor, and a man with no eyes plunges a needle through Jacob's forehead. And in that moment, I mean, he's told by one of the doctors that he's dead, that he's actually dead. So while most of those scenes, again, feel very much just cut from the cloth of a kind of an average working life in the late 1970s, there are elements of those scenes that are absolutely horrifying and are meant to terrify us and meant to make us feel uneasy. So the chief question I think the film is asking is, what might consciousness do or look like in the minutes or hours before our death, right? If death is coming, we know it's coming. Consciousness knows it's coming. If it's not something that is sudden, but instead is something that we're kind of suffering toward, what does consciousness look like in that window? And how much of what we feel or think or imagine in those moments, those final moments, how much of that is informed by regret or by guidance or instruction that we've received from people, mentor figures, parents, loved ones over the years? How much of that is informed by wish fulfillment or by longing? I think that's what this really boils down to. Jacob's final, we might say his final confusion of consciousness, right? Consciousness struggling to make sense of a life, consciousness struggling to make sense of what is happening, to come to terms with fear and with regret, and with love, and with the need to be comforted, etc., etc. That last confusion of consciousness. This is what Jacob is struggling with. This is what we see. We actually are seeing on screen what's happening in his brain at the end of his life. And then all of these things, right, in any of our lives, in those last moments, will these things work in concert to kind of bring us to a place of peace, bring us to a place where we feel as though we've been reconciled to our past? Or will these things work in concert to rattle us and terrify us? Will they work to exploit or amplify our fear? And that's another one of the questions the film raises. Now, the message of the film, I really feel like, is summed up in the character of Louis, right, Jacob's chiropractor. And at one point, he is talking to Jacob about Meister Eckhart. And Louis says that Eckhart wrote that if you're frightened of dying, you'll see demons tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace with death, then what you're seeing are actually angels freeing you from the earth, from your corporeal existence. And that's what's happening to Jacob in the film. All right, he is essentially being terrorized by what's going on in his mind in those last moments, because he's clinging so fiercely to life. You know, like the guys who were working on him at the end, right? The medics. You know, I think they even mentioned that he was a fighter. He didn't go easily. But Jacob is clinging so fiercely to life that everything happening in his mind is essentially an act of terrorism. But the thing that struck me most watching Jacob's Ladder this time, and I've seen this movie a lot over the years. This was the first film I ever owned. I bought it on VHS when I was, I think, 16 years old. But the thing that struck me most watching it this time was his quiet civilian life, right? This life that he is imagining himself into as an overeducated postal worker. The scene where we see him driving his postal truck just kind of leisurely, and he is singing the song that we later actually hear him singing to his son who had died before the war. I think it's just so lovely, and I feel like this is his consciousness manifesting a wish that he had chosen this path, right? Or that he had at least had a chance at a life like this that was subdued and that was calm and that was peaceful. And there's something so moving about that, about this notion of missing a calm or peace in life that we never had to begin with, right? That we can long for something, long for the memory of something that we never actually possessed. So that's it. Basically, that's all I'm going to talk about. There's a rabbit hole of stuff that we could talk about. If you watch the film with me, I would love to hear in the comments below what you thought of it. What were the things that intrigued you most about it? Maybe we can actually carry on a conversation down below. In November, this month, we're going to be reading a book again. But the film that we're going to watch this month is Steve McQueen's film Hunger. Right? So Steve McQueen is the director who went on to make 12 Years a Slave. Hunger is his first feature film. It's mind-blowing, in my opinion. I look forward to watching it again and talking with you guys about it. I will have a video up on Hunger mid-month, this month here in November. And then the book that we're going to be reading this month for the Mortality Project is Julian Barnes's memoir, Nothing to Be Frightened of. Which is a wonderful title in large part because it can be interpreted 2 or 3 different significant ways. But this is a memoir that I read years ago and I'm looking forward to rereading with you guys. And my video on it will be up. Near the end of the month. So we'll have the whole month to read this, and it's perfect because it's as nonfiction. It fits right in with Nonfiction November too. So you guys can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. But that's it. That's my video on Jacob's Ladder. Again, sorry it's a couple of days late, but please let me know in the comments below what you thought of the film, and I will see you again very soon. Adios.